Hello, everyone. How are we? Welcome to week 2. This week, we're going to be covering chapter 2 and chapter 3 in our textbook. And we have a lot to cover in this quick little lecture. And so I will be skipping some slides. This doesn't mean that they're not important, but I just wanted to, that you should be looking at them in the textbook slides that are in the same section of the online lecture. But I'm not going to comment on them because I have to cover two chapters today. So again, welcome to this week. I'm glad that you made it through week 1. Hopefully you're enjoying it and staying curious about what we're learning in abnormal psych. Let's start with chapter 2 here. I'll start our share. And here we go. There we go. So this is our learning objectives for chapter 2. We're going to be talking about the ethics and scientific study of abnormal psychology. We'll talk about some of the parts of the nervous system, a little bit about the neurotransmitters, and some other important issues. Before we had a lot of rules and regulations on the federal level regarding psychological research. Pretty much it was everybody could do the kind of experiments that they wanted on animals and on people, and a lot of times those animals and people were harmed. After a while, we decided that we should put some boundaries around that and have, we came out with what they call a Belmont report, which was one of the first and still defining documents about scientific research in psychology. And basically it has 3 core principles: that we want to be respectful of people, and we want to make sure that we are doing this research for their well-being, and that there's some kind of fairness in the distribution of the results of our of our studies. A big part of that is informed consent. In other words, that the people that we are studying, that are in our experiment, know what they're in for as much as possible, and know the risks and the benefits of the experiment that they have either volunteered for or are being paid for. If you remember from Intro to Psych, there's the 2 parts of our neuroanatomy: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The nerve cells, or neurons, are made up of the soma, the dendrites, the axon, and the synapses are that little gap in between the 2 neurons where the neurotransmitters communicate with each other. Here's a picture of 2 neurons and the neuron transmitters. Again, it's sort of a review from our intro to psych. The brainstem is that part of the brain that's right here that goes right down into our spinal cord on the back of our necks. And this is basically where it controls some of the more fundamental breathing, heart rate, all of that kind of stuff, and basic motor control occurs right through this area. The midbrain has to do with kind of sensory information, taking in the data from our ears, our eyes, and nose, and touch, and making sense of it, doing that kind of sensation and perception thing, doing that perception part of what is this data that we are gathering. The limbic system, including the amygdala, which is right in here, this area here, is important, this whole limbic system area, in kind of controlling our emotions and our impulses. The cerebral cortex is the largest part of the forebrain here, somewhat right behind our forehead. This is where we do a lot of our executive thinking, our decision making, our impulse control modulation is there. So when the limbic system in the center of the brain says you need to be angry because this person is trying to hurt you. The frontal lobes will be able to decide what's the best way to deal with this situation. Should we calm down, or should we, yes, this is a dangerous situation, let's do something to take care of it. The thalamus area and the hypothalamus area controls a lot of our behavior, alertness, and kind of relays a lot of the sensory information to the different parts of the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. The endocrine system is, again, in review. We went into this in a lot more detail in our introductory course. The endocrine system is another way that our body communicates with us and our brain through our glands and hormones. These are the chemical messages. So in the neurons, we have neurotransmitters that are the messengers, and in our hormonal endocrine system, it's these hormones that are released into our bloodstream and work throughout our body. In modern psychological research, we can do a lot more as far as looking into our brains while we are doing things, because we have some sophisticated measuring devices such as CAT scans or MRIs, and we can see actually in the brain structure when things are happening and what part of the brains are receiving more oxygen via the blood system to know that that part of the brain is being activated. This can tell us what parts of the brains might be associated with certain ideas about functions of our brain and our bodies and as we live our lives. A lot of research is done in psychology with twins and with adopted children, because we can take a look at the genetic component and the nature-nurture of this and the effects of nature and the genetics on our psychological well-being or dysfunction. One of the most kind of detailed experiments we can do in psychology is that of a case study. And that's where we're taking an individual or a group of individuals and we're studying just them. And we're kind of observing them and studying how they are doing. It's important to have these because it helps a lot with clinical issues. It's hard to generalize the results off of a case study because we really are not studying enough people to say, oh, all people will do this particular behavior in this particular situation. Correlation methods that we talked about many times is where correlation is basically, is there a relationship between two things happening? Is there a relationship between people meeting each other and maybe being angry with each other? Is there a relationship between those two things? Not necessarily can we say one thing caused the other. In other words, anger is not caused by two people meeting, but it does happen. There is some relationship between that. Controlled group studies. This is where we're into true experiments, where we have people who are the experimental group. They are exposed to the treatment. They are given the treatment, the pill or whatever the talk therapy that we're trying to do. And then there's a control group, which is a comparison group that don't receive any treatment or talk therapy. And then we take a look at both of those and we see, did whatever we do to the experimental group help them or not? Who got, I guess, better in this thing, or who was healed, or who was whatever, would be what we're after in these experiments. It's important to have a good sample of people, a good diversity of individuals in our experiment. And so we want to make sure that we have a good representation sample of people. Our textbook will talk a lot about epidemiology, and basically epidemiology is nothing more than kind of how do we see this disease or disorder, dysfunction? Is there a pattern in the populations? In other words, is it seen more in certain kinds of places in the world, certain kinds of people in the world, age group, male, female, socioeconomic issues? What is the prevalence, the total number of the population that we have? Well, that covers chapter 2. Let's talk about, stop this share. Hi, everyone. And we'll start a new share on chapter 3 here so that we can get through that. Here we're at chapter 3, and now we're talking a little bit about clinical assessment and diagnosis. This is often one of the most interesting chapters for students, and for me too. So we're talking a little bit about kind of how do clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, social workers make an assessment on the individuals that we're working with as what is their disorder, or do they have a disorder at all? What's going on? We'll talk a little bit about personality tests and such. So a clinical assessment is kind of basically gathering information in order to make a decision about what kind of treatment would be best. A lot of times this is either done with paper and pencil and questions, or it's an interview between the clinician and the person that we're talking about. The screening is somewhat of an art. We're asking certain questions, looking for certain symptom groups. How are you sleeping? How's your eating going? What are your emotions doing? How long has this been happening to you? All of those kinds of things that we're looking to either screen in for depression or screen out for anxiety, or whatever the person that's in front of us brings to us. Basically, in this class, when we're talking about a diagnosis, we're trying to identify whatever the disorder or the illness is. Is this depression? Is this anxiety? We want to look, when we're doing a differential diagnosis, if it looks like it could be one thing, but it could be another, we want to make sure that we are looking at the two different things and ruling out one, or maybe waiting a while so that we can actually get some more information from the patient or the client. After the treatment, we're looking at outcome evaluations. Did the person do better? Did they progress? Were they healed, so to speak, by whatever we did, whatever medication they received, or whatever treatment that they had, in order to help us in the future to help other people. When we're looking at assessments, there's a couple of things that we want to look at. One is the assessment, say we're looking at an inventory tool, a questionnaire, is it reliable? In other words, does it consistently do what it says it's trying to do? So if we have an inventory that's looking for someone to see if someone's clinically depressed or not, does it actually do that consistently every time that we give it to different people. This is what reliability means. Validity is basically, does the inventory test what it says it's testing for? So does that depression inventory questionnaire actually test for depression? If it doesn't, then it's not a good measurement. It's not a good thing. We need validity and reliability in both things. We want to also take into consideration some cultural factors, a lot of different age and developmental factors. We wouldn't give a full-on, maybe 500 question MMPI questionnaire to a 5-year-old, because there'd be no way that they'd be able to get through all of that. But it would be maybe very appropriate for a 25-year-old. It's important that the psychologists, counselors, marriage and family therapists, social workers are trained in whatever assessment tools they're using. As part of our ethical code, that we will not use treatments or assessments that we have not been specifically trained on. And it's important that we get informed consent for the person. In other words, we ask them if it's okay that we do this. Clinical interviews is probably the most used assessment tool in psychology. And this is basically a conversation between the patient and the doctor, counselor, asking kind of open-ended questions and some closed-ended questions, how much did you sleep last night? How is your social circle? Do you have some support how's your family? Where is your family? Are they helpful for you? Personality tests, such as the MMPI, which I said earlier, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, it's probably one of the most popularly used tests. Is kind of important and is used a lot of times in either forensic psychology or also in some career counseling, and also some job search places will use this to help the employers kind of get a better picture of the person that they might be hiring. There's projective tests, which is the Rorschach ink blot test, and the TAT, or the thematic apprehensive test, are where we were actually showing things and having people tell us what they see within the ink blot or the picture that we're showing them. Psychologists are also known for being the best people to go to for taking intelligence tests or kind of learning ability tests. They are the licensed clinical psychologists, or the people that specialize in intelligent and learning issues, and are probably the best people to go see. Comorbidity is something that in assessment that we're looking at, and that's basically that there's 2 different disorders or more than 2 happening within the same person. And this happens quite often, actually. So we'll have either a substance abuse disorder and depression, or a substance abuse disorder and anxiety. And so comorbidity is basically just having more than one thing as we're going along. It's important that when we do a diagnosis, that we understand that this is, we're putting a label on a person, and that we're actually, that there's a person behind that label. We try to use a lot of person first language. In other words, we say this is a person who is suffering from the symptoms of schizophrenia, or this is a person who is um, experiencing bipolar disorder. So we're trying not to say this person is all encompassed in their disorder. And that brings us to the end of chapter 3. Thank you for sticking with us through that somewhat longer time of 2 chapters. I'm sorry that I had to skip some of those slides. Go back and see them if you need to. Have a great week. I will see you next week. Bye for now.